This video was produced by
Okay, everybody, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. I am Molly Plautz, and I'm with Dominion's Alternative Energy Solutions Group. We have a great panel planned this morning. It's the Utility Project Issues panel, and we have one speaker who is on the way, James Barrett, but I'd like to just quickly introduce our speakers. You all should have a background sheet with their background information, so I encourage you to take a look at that. But just quickly, Salud Goodin is with Dominion, and she's in the Business Development Group. We also have Katie Chapman, and she's with EDP Renewables. And as I mentioned, James Barrett will join us in a few minutes, and he's with Applied Solutions. So I think we'll just go ahead and jump right in and get started with Katie's presentation.
I thought really hard about it. Do you like it? Okay, as Molly said, my name is Katie Chapman. I'm a project manager for EDP Renewables. I'm going to walk through a little bit about our company and then our wish list as a developer and our development process to put that wish list into context, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about one of our projects that we're working on in Virginia. Next slide. So for those of you who don't know us, we're the third largest company in the US in terms of installed capacity. We started out as a small mom and pop development shop out of Houston, Texas, Zilka Renewables, and we are now a globally operating wind and utilities company. We operate over 28 wind farms across the United States. We are soup to nuts, so we develop, construct, own, and operate our wind projects. Next slide, please. So this is our wish list. The production tax credit, as I'm sure all of you know, helps us front the high investment in wind projects that happens as pre-project development. So before the project produces a dime of revenue, we need to invest really heavily in the infrastructure and permitting process. And then the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard, or in Virginia's case, the goal, is what incentivizes utilities to purchase green energy and helps them move in that direction so that we can be certain that we have a market in which to sell our product. So to put this in context a little bit, let's all assume that we are project managers. So I'm a project manager, and what that means is I spend money. I spend a lot of money. And I spend it before the project is up, before it is really more than a circle on a map. And so because it's a high upfront investment, what we do is we approach investors early on in the development process, and we would say, hey, Mr. Investor, we would really like you to fund our project. It's an awesome little project. We know you're going to love it. The investor turns around and says, well, that's great, but what's the cost and what's the risk? And we say, well, we'd love to say that we're developing in a state that has a rock-solid renewable energy portfolio standard, that utilities are stumbling all over themselves to purchase green energy, and that the production tax credit is going to give us a financial boost on the front end of the project financing curve, and that everything with the project as far as permits and regulations go is looking very smooth. But in reality, let's suppose we're developing in a state that has more of a goal, so it's more of a voluntary thing, so that if a utility wanted to volunteer to purchase slightly more expensive green energy, they could go out and maybe secure a PPA or a power purchase agreement, or they might not. And really, if it's a goal, if it has no teeth, as we would say, then the incentive to do that is a little less present, and it's a a little less certain for us that we're going to have a market for our product, for our electricity. So supposing that this investor is paying attention to this, and supposing that the investor is paying attention to the production tax credit and the uncertainty surrounding that, they might be scratching their heads and saying, so let me get this straight. You want me to invest in a project that you're not sure you can build because there's permitting uncertainty and regulatory uncertainty. And even if you built it, you're not sure that you can sell your product because there's no renewable energy portfolio standard that's going to dictate that utilities will have X amount of demand. And there's no production tax credit to help from the federal government to help me swallow this pill. And you'll say, well, yeah, but it's a really cool project. So this is when the investor is either going to tell you, good luck, I'll see you next time, and motions for security to take this person out. Or this is where the person sits down and says, okay, seriously, what are you talking about? And that's where we would say, this site is so great, it's going to minimize your risk and all the other elements of development. So this is really a pretty secure investment, even given the financial uncertainty that's being caused by the policy variables. So I'm going to walk through what makes a wind site attractive, but the real take-home message here is that without the security of a long-term power purchase agreement, so if we can't sell our power for about 20 years before we build the project, the incentive for us to invest is really hard to argue. Okay, next slide, please. So as a project manager, I spend 90% of my time thinking about one of these 6 characteristics. This is not all-encompassing of the things you need to talk about before you build a project, but these 6 are something that all successful wind projects share in one form or another. The first item is wind. Obviously, without wind, you can't generate wind power. So think of wind as your product, which you're converting into electricity. Luckily, we have moved along quite rapidly on the wind assessment thanks to technology. We have models of the United States with wind speeds. So in the old days, we used to look for trees that were bent, as you see on my slide, and when we saw that, that was a windy site and we should pursue it. Now, thankfully, we have modeling and we have meteorological towers and we have wind turbines that can utilize wind speeds that are lower than ever before, so wind is looking good. Transmission is another one. If you don't have a way to get your product to market, if the line doesn't have capacity to fit your electrons on it, then it doesn't work. Similarly, if there is no line, we don't have Tesla coils that bridge the gap between DC area and other more rural areas where electricity generation is possible. Terrain, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Generally, the higher the elevation, the stronger the wind. We've been making maps since people put pen to paper. Existing land use, that's zoning, local regulations. Do people have houses there? Is there some element of land use that is incompatible with a wind project? Market attractiveness, this goes straight back to the policy uncertainty that I was discussing earlier. If you can generate a product and if you can get it to market, that's great. But if there is no market, then there's no point. Community acceptance is the last one. If the community is not on board with your project, there's really no point in developing. It's going to be an uphill battle the entire way if it's possible at all. Next slide, please. So I'm going to walk through briefly the timeline for the project so that you understand why we're so serious about long-term power purchase agreements before we invest. Really, when you're talking to your potential project investor, you're going to be talking about an investment that takes place years before the project actually gets built. So for certain, years before that investor sees a dime of revenue from their investment. So the development phase typically takes us about 2 to 7 years. This is where we do most of our studies for environmental studies, transmission studies, geotechnical and site design studies. There's a gamut of historical preservation, you name it, Ducks United permits to secure. We also measure the wind during this time to make sure that we have verified wind resource at the site. Next slide. Thanks. Construction typically takes us 1 to 2 years, depending on the size of the project. It can take as little as 1 season. The majority of construction is taken up with turbine foundations, road construction, and burying collection line. Really, the turbines go up in a matter of weeks. Most people are surprised to hear that. And then at the end of construction, we spend about 2 weeks cleaning up the site, revegetating roads, so narrowing the roads and revegetating most of them because we maintain the roads for the lifetime of the project. Next. Operations, this is really our bread and butter. This is where we sell power. This is what my company is very focused on. I'm on the development end, which is really the tip of the iceberg for us. It's a very short part of the project life cycle and the shortest aside from construction. Operations is really a huge amount of expertise and work goes into that. I would encourage you all to look into that further. It's a really neat part of the business. Next. Next. Okay. So as a specific example, in Virginia, we are currently working on Poplar Camp. It's in southwest Virginia. We believe it could support up to 72 megawatts. We are in discussions with landowners. We've begun preliminary studies. For any of you utilities out there, we expect to put power on the grid around 2015 or a little later. I'd love to talk if you've got the time. Next. This is a map of the project. The yellow are transmission lines. The black is the county boundary between Carroll and Witt. And the topo map is kind of self-explanatory. Next. So just next steps for Poplar Camp, continue on with studies, continue on with lease negotiations. We are really hoping that all of you will go home and make calls to your legislators to help support the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard and the production tax credit. That's a really critical part of our business. And I would like to conclude by thanking the Virginia Wind Energy Collaborative and conference holders for inviting me here to speak today. I'm looking forward to some pretty good questions. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Katie. I think we'll hold questions till the end. So we'll go ahead and pull Salud's slides up now.
Okay, I'm Salud Goodin. Are they up yet? And I'm not going to move around like you do. I feel very comfortable behind my podium, but I think that my presentation builds really well on some of the issues that Katie brought out. And one thing to keep in mind, and you'll see this coming through my presentation, is the fact that Virginia is a regulated state. That means that the utilities here have to go before the State Corporation Commission to get projects approved, and also biannual reviews in order to recover money that they're spending. So kind of keep that in mind, and you'll see that theme walking through as we go through the slides. Go to the first slide, please. We do see, Dominion does see renewable energy as part of the solution. It's a long-term process. We believe in participating in the goal, the voluntary goal. And in North Carolina, we have a mandated goal that we have to meet. We also understand that renewable energy reduces our carbon intensity. We have a philosophy at Dominion where we want to keep our fuel sources diverse. Just like you want to do your financing at home with a diverse portfolio, you want to make sure that you've got, in our portfolio, we have gas, we have nuclear, and we have renewable energy. We also understand that renewable energy brings a lot of good economic development opportunities to the state and to localities. And renewable energy also helps hedge against the adverse effects of rising fuel costs. So if we've got renewable energy out there and gas prices starts to spike, it's not going to affect our costs that much. So we do believe very much in trying to develop renewable energy. Next slide. Oh, good. Thank you. I didn't know it was there. So these are the activities that Dominion has done. You can see prior to 2004, we did have some hydro facilities. The main points on this slide that I want to point out to is the fact that in 2008 we did construct and start up 2 wind power facilities. One is in West Virginia, and the other one is in Indiana. And then here in 2012, recently, we responded to BOEM's call for offshore wind. There were 8 respondents in total. So we are looking forward to moving ahead and pursuing the opportunities to build offshore wind. This map has a layout of the various renewable projects that we have. We have the ones in red are projects that are under development, and the ones in black are the ones that we currently have. You'll see the Fowler Ridge in Indiana. There's one in Illinois, Prairie Fork, that is under development. We have the 3 biomass facilities that are currently, or this year will start getting constructed. We're converting the coal power plants into biomass power plants. And there's 3 wind projects in Virginia that I'll speak to a little bit more in depth. And then recently our VCHEC, that's a coal-fired power facility, but it has ability to burn biomass up to 117 megawatts. So these are the sites that are in Virginia that we want to build wind power on, and a lot of people know about the Tazewell project. We were in the middle of trying to get that up and running, going through the development process, and Tazewell County put in an ordinance that does not allow us to build structures up to a certain height. So that ordinance has kind of put a stop on the project at that time. There are 2 other sites that we currently are developing, and they're not public yet, but we continue to monitor or get met data for these sites. We've got land leases with our property owners, and we maintain relationships with them. And like recently, we did a LiDAR survey on our sites to see a little bit better the terrain. It's kind of things that we need to have, so when the market, as you'll see later, one of the major drivers, when things change, we would have things ready to be able to move forward with the next steps of development. Next slide, please. So what does need to happen in Virginia to make things move forward? First of all, and the biggest issue right now, if you want to call it an issue, is that natural gas prices are really, really low. And that, for us as a regulated utility, when we go before the State Corporation Commission, we have to show that we're being prudent and that our project is cost effective. They're there to protect our rates. And so if you take a wind project right now, they're going to compare that against our combined cycle turbine. And it's just not going to compare. They'll say they will not approve a wind project, whereas a CC or a CT, because gas is driving the market right now, would get approved. So that's a significant element of what's causing the market to be against wind, I guess you could say. REC prices need to rise significantly, as Katie mentioned. The PTCs and REC prices, those are things that come into play in the pro formas of your financial analysis, and they lower the cost of the project, so they help make it more economical. They will need to come up in order for wind projects to be more economical. The price of turbines right now are fairly low, but as gas prices go up, there's going to be more demand for turbines, more demand for wind projects, and just the simple economics 101, supply demand, if you have more demand, then your costs go up. So we would have to have turbine prices stay low even in a high demand market. Turbine efficiencies have really improved greatly over the years. That improvement needs to continue in order to make the projects more efficient. And that's a technology factor. The other ones that I've talked about before were market factors. And another really big one, especially in Virginia, and we'll speak to this a little bit longer, is the opposition. If you have local opposition that's not accepting to have wind turbines on their ridge lines, it's very hard to get the project moving. I'm just going to compare what's going on in Virginia with other states in the PJM, that's the Regional Transmission Organization that Dominion operates under. You can see the blue dots are wind projects that are currently under operation, and then the red are wind projects that are under construction. And you can see that a lot of it is focused in the Illinois, Indiana area, Pennsylvania, not much going on in Virginia. I think that's kind of well known. Next slide, please. We went out and did a market analysis to show over the years how much wind energy was being produced. We started at 2000 on this slide, and it goes to what is estimated for 2014. And then I did it by state. So here you see that the wind projects were really being built in the 2007, 2008, 2009. At that time frame, it looked like there was something different going on in the market so that they became more viable. I think the reason that we see a spike here under 2012 is because the PTCs are about to expire. And so more developers are saying, let's go ahead. They need to build and get it under construct or in operation by 2013. But look at what happens in 2013 and 14 with no PTC involved. It really does drop down. Could we do the next one before we move to this one? I would like to come back. And I'd like to do it in this order just because it really aligns well with what I just showed you on the other one. This is what gas prices have done over the years in the same time frame, 2002 to 2012. And you can see where gas prices were really high in that 6, 7, 8 time frame is when wind projects were a lot more economical. Once they start dropping down, they're not as economical. All right, let's go back to the other one, please. Yes. And this is just a breakdown so you can see by the different states that I had in the PJM market. Illinois, Indiana, those are the biggest ones, and Pennsylvania. And I'll talk a little bit about West Virginia as we delve a little deeper into the dynamics that are going on here. So what happens in these states that are making things a little bit better for wind as opposed to states where wind isn't really working very well? The first chart, the red and the orange chart, that shows you where the RPS policies are mandated versus either nothing at all or a goal. In the mandated states, obviously, if the utility has to meet a mandate, then they get if they're not regulated, they do it. If they are regulated, the commission that is overseeing the regulatory process would have to approve it because they've got a mandate. Whereas in Virginia, where we just have a goal, and we have to go before the commission, we don't have those same drivers that some of these other states have. Another factor that comes into play is, as I mentioned, the being regulated versus unregulated. Typically, the regulated states tend to have a higher energy cost. So that means that when you're checking a project out against their current rates, it's easier to pass through because you already have a high rate, so you're coming in with a project that's higher cost. It's a lot easier for it to get through the commission or to justify putting in a project like that. We also have an issue in Virginia with wind resources and the wind maps that Katie mentioned. You see that in Virginia we have very limited areas for wind projects. It's very hard to see, but on the ridge line where you see a little bit of yellow, those red tiny little dots is where they're best. And those red tiny little dots are also where we have national forest, and we have a lot of people that don't want to see wind turbines on their beautiful ridge lines. So there's those dynamics working against Virginia. There is some off to the coastline, if you see, but that if you are familiar with Virginia, you know that's a very, very populated area. Not a lot of land space there to build wind farms. Compare that to Illinois. Look at the chart there. And they've got really, really nice wind in Illinois. Next, please. And we've got the terrain issues that I was mentioning. In Virginia, the ridge lines, if you've been up to the Shenandoah Valley or mountains, you have to take these huge hairpin turns. And if you can imagine trying to get large pieces of equipment and long blades up these roads, it takes millions of dollars to either build new roads or upgrade the roads that are already existing. Look at Illinois and Indiana, fairly flat, large plains, farmland, where it's a lot easier to get the equipment up there and build. So their capital costs for building the power plant or the wind farms there is a lot lower than it is in Virginia. And I'll just mention, can we just go back? Since I promised to talk about West Virginia a little bit. West Virginia has no national forests in their ridge lines, and they're easier to get up to. They have a lot longer ridge lines, so the economies of scale are improved in their state, and they have a lot better wind resource. Thank you. So the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy in Virginia did an analysis to see how much renewable resources the state has, and they came up with 800 megawatts of onshore wind for Virginia, which is really not a lot. So this is our interpretation of what has happened in the past to some of the projects that have made things stall in Virginia. Back in 2006, there was a community energy project in Patrick County. There was a lot of local opposition to that project, and it stalled in 2006. One in 2009, Highland New Wind. It's in Highland County. They went through all the permitting. They had their SEC, CPCN, and it stalled. But look at the time frame. It was 2009, and as I showed earlier, that's exactly when the prices of gas made it so that wind projects weren't as economical. We had the project in Tazewell in 2010 when we were before the Board of Supervisors, and they voted to put in a wind ordinance that made it impossible for us to build on that site until the wind ordinance is reversed. We have the other two localities in that same time frame, 2009, because of the gas prices. They became uneconomical. They do remain in development. Like I said, I do keep up with leases. I have landowners that I talk to. I go and visit the site. We're collecting data. So they are under development, and hopefully one day, and they do, the market does change, we'll be able to move forward with those. In the meantime, it's just kind of waiting for the opportunity to be able to take this to the commission and have them approve it. Invenergy, that's a very recent one in Roanoke. They shut down because of the market, but also the production tax credits. The fact that it wasn't going to be extended, or the thought that it won't be extended, has shut that project down or stalled it. So show you some of the factors that we believe cause wind turbine or wind farms to be economical. Turbine prices, as I mentioned earlier, they came down over the past years by 30%. So that's actually improving the economics and making it better for building. And turbine efficiencies, as I mentioned earlier, that's gone up about 20%. That's a medium impact and also kind of an improvement to the project analysis. Cost of capital, however, has stayed fairly neutral. We just recently did a pro forma on our projects just to see, because of the increases in efficiency and the decreases in price, does this make sense? Is this something that we can now take forward? And the capital costs in Virginia, like I said earlier, really hard to build, very costly, and couldn't move forward with them. More changes is the wholesale power prices we mentioned, and this is probably the biggest thing. I mean, having the price of gas where it is right now is really causing a negative impact for wind projects. REC prices, as I mentioned earlier, they need to, they came down quite a bit. They need to go back up. They were about $20 REC or a megawatt in 2007, 2008. They're at $2 now. Wind resource assessment is an interesting phenomena that has occurred. When you put your project together, as Katie mentioned, you do your financial analysis, and part of that is trying to determine how much energy are you going to be producing so that you can figure out how much money are we going to be making so that your investors say, yeah, this is a great project. Well, what's happening is those models that they use to figure out how much energy is being produced, how much money can we make, they're turning out not to be accurate. They're 10 to 15% below what they thought they would be. And it's because, you know, in the model world, you have a turbine and it's doing everything it's supposed to do. But when you go out in reality, the blades maybe aren't shifting exactly when they should, the turbine doesn't turn exactly to capture the wind, and you're getting these losses in energy. And that's being looked at fairly heavily in the industry. I think probably we'll see some changes in the way they model the energy assessments. But when you build a project and you're making 15% less and the margins are already really thin, that really affects the viability. So we were comparing Virginia to other states, but just kind of wrap it up a little bit. The capital costs of these projects in Virginia are a lot higher because of our terrain. And the fact that we have small ridge lines, the economy of scales do not come into play for us. We have high opposition. The project that we did in Illinois, they were asking us, when are you coming? Come now. You know, they wanted the project built right away. In Virginia, we see people saying, no way, don't come build over here. So that's a tough hurdle to climb. And the available sites. Virginia has a lot less capacity for wind than some of the other states that we compare at in the PJM region. The renewable portfolio standards or state policies. Having a renewable portfolio goal in Virginia doesn't really drive us away from doing the project. What drives us away from being able to do the project is the cost, because we can't take it to the commission. We want to participate in the RPS. We had filed to participate, and we're meeting our requirements, but we can't take wind before the commission. So that it's not making it a mandate that would change it. It has to be the economics of the project. And wind resources, again, we have kind of moderate wind resources here when you compare it to the other PJM states. We do have a positive attribute in PJM, and that is the fact that we have a very liquid REC market. We can trade with all the other states that are in the PJM market. So that's a positive impact for us. And Katie kind of went through the various steps of project development, so I won't harp too long on this, but as you can see, basically when you do the pro forma, when you get to that economic analysis, a lot of projects stop there because they don't make the cut that you need to have before you can take something to the commission to get approved. Lastly, we saw this slide earlier in a different way, but if you kind of look at what needs to happen to change it as opposed to what's happening that's making it bad. Basically what needs to happen is natural gas prices need to rise significantly. The REC prices need to rise significantly. Turbine prices are going to need to stay low even if you have high demand for turbine. So basically going a little bit against what Economics 101 would tell you. Turbine efficiency needs to continue to improve, and you need to have low to no opposition at the sites that you're trying to develop. Thank you.
Thanks, Salud. Great, and I'd like to just introduce our final speaker today, James Barrett with Applied Solutions.
Hi, and I have to apologize for being late. I ran into a very low-tech problem this morning, which was a car accident on Route 33 between here and my family's place where I was staying. So I apologize for being late. My name is Jim Barrett. I'm an economist with a group called Applied Solutions. We work with local governments to help them put together clean energy projects of various sorts. We do assessments of the assets they have and their local needs and the local character and try to help them put together some projects. So wind in Virginia can be pretty tough, as we just heard. There's a lot of reasons why it may not happen or why it's not happening to the speed that we would like. And part of that is due to the market, and part of that is due to the regulatory framework that Virginia still sits in, which is still, in many ways, the old-fashioned fully integrated utility model. And of course, when they go to put something in front of the PUC, they have to be able to justify things on the economics. And I apologize a little bit. I don't do slides. My staff has barred me from doing slides because I usually just read from them. And I think you guys can read from them as well as I can. So I won't bore you with those. One tool that we see as potentially very useful in places like Virginia, but really across the country, that a lot of people don't know about, and I'm not sure how applicable it is to utility scale projects because it's a little bit on the smaller side. But there is federal money out there to help bring down the capital costs of renewable and efficiency projects of various types. And I know in Virginia they haven't been used at all. They're called qualified energy conservation bonds. Right? And the way this works is, it's a little bit complicated, and I try not to drag you down to the details, but a state or a municipality can issue a bond, and they have to pay the market rate, whatever the interest rate that is. But if they use it for a particular type of project, that's the qualified part, they can apply back to the federal government to help them subsidize some or all of the costs of issuing those bonds. So if you see places with really good bond ratings, and now it changes on a day-to-day basis. Right now, the subsidy rate from the federal government is about 3.25%. I think 3.4 the last time I looked at the website for a 20-year bond. So if you're issuing a bond, that's 3.4%. Okay? That's a zero cost of capital for borrowing for qualified projects. And wind is typically fairly easy to justify under this law. There are some other things that are not, a little bit more complicated. So if you have a place with a really good bond rating, and I think the state of Virginia still sits on a AAA bond rating, they could issue bonds. These have to be revenue bonds, so they're not general obligation bonds. Revenue bonds probably closer to 2.5. GO bonds, sorry. Yeah, sure, sorry. General obligation bonds are probably closer to 2.5% for the state. A revenue bond will be slightly higher, maybe put a 1% premium on that. So the state of Virginia can probably issue revenue bonds, for example, at around 3.5%, which would give them a 0% cost of capital. That's a little bit into the weeds. The thing to know about this is, a couple things to know about it, is there's roughly $80 billion allocated to the entire state of Virginia for this. As I said, not a single dollar has been used yet. You can combine them with other federal projects like Krebs or whatever else you've probably already heard of. A lot of this money is allocated to particular counties. If you live in a county or a city with more than 100,000 people in it, then there's an allocation made to you, and the allocations in the state run somewhere between $1 million and $10 million worth of these bonds that they're allowed to issue. The other thing to know about this is that to the extent that a state has counties or cities with less than 100,000 people in it, they didn't get allocations, and that money that should have gone to them or would have gone to them under a different formula went to the state for the state to use at its discretion. So at the moment, the state is sitting on authority of roughly $30 million worth of these bonds that they haven't issued for one reason or another. And if someone comes to them with a viable project, perhaps combined with some other federal monies, we're working on projects in places where we think we can get a 0% cost of capital for, again, we're not talking utility scale. A coal plant is a multi-billion-dollar project. It's not a multi-million-dollar project. But for community scale, certainly these things are applicable, and I think we're going to see a whole bunch of these things move in the near future. The things to know about it are that, again, you have to work at the county level. There are limits as to what can be done with private activities, and there's things to work around that. Projects done for the municipality or in a public-private partnership with the municipality, probably you can use these to any extent that you want. But as I said, renewable energies of almost any sort, demonstration projects of almost any sort, are fall under this category of qualified. And there's some other, unfortunately, the IRS is involved for some strange reasons. So you have to deal with the IRS if you want to use these things, and that's not a happy experience for anybody. But it's possible, and I think, like I said, we're working in Maryland. I think Montgomery County's got some projects in the pipeline we're going to help them with. And in Virginia, I think these things can be used for community scale wind as long as you're working with the county. You don't want to run into the opposition problems that you've got in public-private partnerships to get very cheap capital, depending on their bond rating, which does a lot to improve the economics of wind projects. And and I will be happy to give you more details on this. I don't want to put anybody to sleep on the vagaries of dealing with the IRS around this stuff, but it's doable. There's some other ways to get wind projects done. Again, it's a little bit tricky in a state like Virginia. Community choice aggregation, lease back problems. You have to be careful of anything that looks like it might violate the franchise agreement with the utility, because they're going to defend that whether it's a good project or not. That's part of their business model, something that they have to do. And again, dealing with the PUC on a sort of an old-fashioned basis. But looking down the road, I think a couple of factors that we're looking at. The natural gas market is highly volatile. There are a lot of people who don't think that prices can stay this low. That that a lot of that's been driven by the fracking in the Marcellus and the Bartlett Shale, and that's probably not going to pan out to be quite the volume of gas that they expected in the first place. So I see that probably working in wind's favor. The turbine issue is going to be very important, obviously, as demand goes up. Whether or not we can produce turbines fast enough to meet demand and keep prices from rising is going to be an issue. And probably the biggest issue is dealing with the local and being able to site these things where you have the good resources. But I believe working with these QECBs, as they're called, very low cost of capital can help you overcome a lot of the economic hurdles that one faces. And I know we're probably running a little bit late, so I'm going to stop it there. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you've got. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. And I don't know if anybody has questions. There were some little white note cards passed out. I can come up and grab those from you. But I guess I can kick it off with a few questions in the time being. I was just curious, and this probably will go to either Salud or Katie, what the minimum megawatt size of a wind facility in Virginia, what would you typically look for as far as size goes?
I probably don't know the exact answer. I would say that utility scale is about 80 megawatts, Emil. And it's just the economies of scale. We typically don't build generation plants that are smaller than 50 megawatts, but I think just all the capital cost that goes into a wind farm, that probably 80 megawatts is a break point.
And what's the upfront cost of capital putting all this together, just to give people an idea of the scale? Like if you're installing 80 megawatts of wind, how much money do you need upfront to get that going?
Oh, I can't remember what model.
Rough guess?
320 million, 300 million, something like that for something here in Virginia.
In Virginia.
You know, typically out in the Midwest for 80 megawatts, it might be 160 million. But when you add in the road building and bridge improvements that are required to get it up to the site, it might be 50 to 75% higher.
Do you have something?
I would just add to that the size of a utility scale wind farm across the board is going down from our perspective. It's more acceptable on a community basis to have a smaller project, even 20 megawatts and up. People are now looking at on a utility scale. So as sites are taken up either with conservation or ridgetop bands or other development activities that preclude wind, what we'll see moving forward is that we will either use larger turbines for fewer turbine sites, or we'll just have smaller projects altogether.
Okay, and our next question is really focusing on kind of going back to the impact of natural gas prices and the impacts on projects currently under development. And there was a question on how long-term gas price volatility kind of plays into the decision-making process. Does anybody want to comment on that?
So that's a little tricky. I think you have to go back to the fact that you have a diverse portfolio, and the fact that we do believe that the volatility of gas is important in taking into consideration what kind of projects you're building. But at this point, because of the prices where they are, we can't move forward. Yet we understand that it's important to have renewable resources that aren't affected by the turbulence of gas prices. So the answer, I guess, is, yeah, it's very true that you need to take into consideration gas prices, but what we can bring before the Commission in this current environment is not a wind project.
Sure. I would just say that our response to the volatility in the gas market is to look at long-term trends and to position ourselves so that we have projects ready when gas is at an optimal price to encourage investment in our project or power purchase agreements with wind.
Just to add to this a little bit, you probably already know this, and I don't know to what extent that you can make this case in the middle of a rate case, but in energy markets, because they're so fundamental to the economy, long-term sort of trends are important, but there is a cost to volatility that often goes unrecognized. So if natural gas prices are low today, that's great. If they're very high tomorrow, which they very well may be, that that sort of whipsaw not just, if we had high and stable prices, that would be one thing. But if we have prices that go from high to low and high to low and back and forth again, that volatility produces a cost on the economy that probably doesn't get put into the rate case at all. And I don't know how to change that. But things like, unfortunately, for when things like very low cost, coal that doesn't see quite the swings that we're probably going to see in the natural gas market coming up. Things like wind and renewables, why they might be higher priced, but they are steady. It's not the lowest cost to the consumer at that moment, but it's certainly lower cost to the economy as a whole than things that are unpredictable and highly volatile.
Great, thank you so much. I think the next question is directed at Katie. Is what has been the community public response to the Poplar Camp proposal, and where are you currently in your zoning?
So unfortunately, the Poplar Camp expert wasn't able to be here today. His name is Brian Dunback. He was taken away to a project that is going to construction. So I'm covering for him. I'll do my best on this, but I may need to refer you to our actual expert. My understanding is that the response in Poplar Camp has been positive. We typically try to be pretty transparent with the community and with the local government. So as far as zoning goes, we've done an extensive search on that, and it seems to be feasible for the site, and the landowner response has been good as well. Sure. I think that the answer to that is that we are working to position ourselves so that if the market comes back, when it comes back, we will have a project ready to go. We are not developing across Virginia. Our investment in Virginia is pretty well managed, so it's a cautious approach into the state, but sort of keeping a finger in every pie is where we're at right now, particularly given the policy fluctuations that we've been seeing.
So I meant to bring it up in my presentation because you talked about the PPA and the unwillingness of utilities to get into that. And just to kind of be transparent, it's not an unwillingness that we have. We have an obligation to our ratepayers, and if we have a PPA that we put into our rate base, it has to be approved by the commission. And it's just not, it's not an unwillingness, it's more of a regulated environment issue.
I think that super props goes to Dominion for their willingness to comply. I think that they are a definite leader in that field. Did not mean to throw you under the bus.
Let's see here. I had a good one for James, so you're not left out. I think it was what the source of the bond financing, is that an ARA program or just generally the source of the funding?
Sure. Let's see, QECBs were first created, I think, I'm going to say 2006. I could have that number slightly wrong. The reason why I mentioned the IRS is they were originally established as a tax credit bond. So the holders of the bond would get a reduced rate of return and then apply to the IRS for a tax credit. But with the economy turning so poorly, they had very little tax appetite for that. So they turned it into a direct subsidies program, but left the authority with the IRS. And when they passed ARA, they increased the amount of funding substantially from, I'm not sure whatever it was, but to a total of $3.2 billion worth of these bonds that can be issued throughout the country, and they're allocated on a population formula, which comes out, it's a handy rule of thumb, it's not exactly right, but roughly $10 per capita for any place with more than 100,000 people in its formal jurisdiction. And quickly, that money is not in the process of being clawed back or spent down. It's it seems pretty stable. A lot of people are worried about what's going to happen in the budgeting process. It's not on the chopping block.
Okay, thank you. The next question relates to kind of the voluntary nature of the RPS in Virginia, and you know, this compared to a mandatory standard, and how projects might be viewed. And you know, does the voluntary standard impact projects being approved in the state?
Well, approved from the utility standpoint?
Or just from the state corporation commission approving a project? Yeah.
I mean, why don't I start off with that? So ideally what we would like to see is a renewable energy portfolio standard that has not only specified demand, but specified bidding time. So for instance, in New York, we have a pretty good idea of when they're going to put a certain specified amount of power out for bid, which helps us in the planning process as we go for investment in projects. In areas where it's more of a goal, the opportunities tend to be much more unpredictable, which makes planning investment in projects much more difficult to achieve, particularly in areas where local opposition and other factors drive up the cost of development and the length of time that's required to develop a project.
Some of you may know that Dominion operates in both North Carolina and Virginia, and North Carolina does have a mandated RPS, and we're meeting the requirements there. They have carve-outs for solar, carve-outs for swine. Dominion in Virginia doesn't have that. They have the goal, and we are participating. We want to be able to develop renewables. So I would say that the goal isn't making it so that we wouldn't be developing. As a matter of fact, without a goal, we may not even be doing the things that we're doing. The goal is enticing us to develop, and these are long-term projects, and we hope to be able to move forward with them given markets and opportunities that will happen hopefully in the future. But I think that's good.
The next question, I guess, would be directed at Salud. Could the wind projects in West Virginia apply to kind of Virginia supply? So the Ned Power project, does that go towards Virginia supply?
Now that is a merchant plant, so we can't use the RECs for, or for that energy can't be used for the Virginia. Okay. Well, actually, is that right, Emil?
Yeah, I mean,
it's a merchant.
Energy does flow into Virginia many times because that transmission line that it's connected to, comes into Virginia. So it comes into the wholesale power market physically into Virginia, and it's used by probably Northern Virginia population. But from a financial transactional standpoint,
It doesn't.
it's marketed into the PJM market, day-ahead market.
Just in case someone isn't aware, a merchant project is one that sells power on a short-term basis. There's day-ahead and hourly markets, and depending on where you are in the country, that's set up, down to a 10-minute interval. But a merchant project is much more susceptible to fluctuations in natural gas prices because those drive energy prices, and that in turn will dictate what they can sell their power for feasibly. So a long-term power purchase agreement is something that will help shelter you from that risk. So that's part of the long view on gas, is that if you have a 20-year power purchase agreement, then for 20 years you don't need to worry as much about natural gas prices.
This question goes to James. Is there a website where the details of the qualified bond program can be found?
Because it's the federal government, the answer is no. It takes a lot of work to track these things down. I hate to self-promote, but if you go to our website, appliedsolutions.org, and look for something we call the QECB guidebook, there's about a 6-page, hopefully pretty easy to understand thing that you can download and look at to fill you in on some of the details.
Okay, just a few more questions. I guess This question says, if cost was not a factor, and there was a community that was willing to invest in a small wind project, would there be a minimum project size? So I think this is similar to the question before, but I don't know if that would change anything with cost not being a factor.
It's a little difficult to answer just because the places where the wind resources are pretty remote. And I mean, I don't know whether they're looking at doing a community scale on top of a ridge line. But I think that we're still, I mean, they do have some projects in Virginia where one property owner has a small wind turbine. So those are happening. And I think JMU probably has website information about how to make that possible. And there were presentations made yesterday about community scale. So I think, yeah, I think they're probably happening at a very small scale, not at a large scale.
Okay, I think we have time for a few more questions. This one relates to whether different industries, so you know, the coal industry or the natural gas industry or the solar industry, what's kind of been the interplay between the different industries? Has there been opposition that you've seen between the industries? Or is it kind of an all of the above approach, just in your experience? Katie's smiling.
I'm smiling because I think that my response will differ from that of my fellow panelists a little bit, in that we're coming from a strictly wind and solar development approach, and she has the advantage or, you know, situation of having an all of the above approach. So from my standpoint, we are competing directly with other sources of energy. And there is sometimes some overlap between the industries with respect to regulatory requirements or things like that, where we're able to collaborate. But largely, in my experience, that is not the case. I think we'll hear from the other side shortly.
I mean, I think we are all of the above. Dominion is agnostic as to what type of generation. We just like to build power plants, and whatever is making the most sense and whatever we can bring to the commission is where we're gonna be playing. So it's not like we prefer one over the other. We're pretty much all of the above. And as I said, we are very philosophical about keeping a diverse portfolio so that we can hedge any of the markets up and down for the various types of fuels.
This question relates to turbine technology. Do any of you see changes in turbine technology impacting the cost of energy? And if so, how much?
The magical technology question. So historically, as we've approached this climate change issue and clean energy in general, we've had a tendency to overestimate our capacity for developing technology and for the ability of that technology to bridge gaps. So I think that the current trend is to put, frankly, larger blades on equal or taller tower bases, and I think that we're seeing improvements there. I think we're also working on materials changes to make blades lighter and more durable to keep our operations costs down. So there's a number of technological improvements that are going on. As far as how much that will directly impact the cost of energy, my crystal ball is a little bit murky on that one. I'm hoping that it will be a great impact, but that's not something that I frankly am counting on right now.
The only thing I would add to that is there might be improvements in instrumentation to the turbines, so they can become more efficient, but I agree 100% with what you said.
Okay. This question relates to kind of interstate transmission and PJM. Are there any barriers to kind of interstate transmission within PJM? And should wind projects basically focus, since Virginia has development issues as far as terrain and the cost of projects, should some of the focus be in states, you know, adjacent to or within PJM?
Well, we did have a period of time where we were obviously building the merchant power plants, which are outside of the state. About the same time that prices started to increase and the energy plan in Virginia was the, what do you call it? Yeah, the energy plan. We decided to focus our generation in state because Virginia is the second largest importer of energy next to California. So the philosophy seems to be right now more and more building in state. If we need to build generation, we'll be doing it in the state. Not to say that that would change later given other opportunities or markets that might develop, but for the time being, our focus is really to be building inside the state of Virginia.
And then as far as, I think the question asked about transmission constraints, I think that one of the things that we look at when we are looking for sites is, does the line that we're looking to interconnect to have the room to transport the power we would like? So currently the map, if you can envision in your head the mid-Atlantic, the map is pretty constrained from New Jersey swinging around the Baltimore area and into the more populated areas of Virginia. So that area is sort of a red zone for constraints. It's frequently heat. Anyway, there are different kinds of capacity constraints, and that area in particular has a lot of people using power from elsewhere in the mid-Atlantic. So if I was going to target an area that I would like to see improvements made, that's kind of a sweet spot. Being able to get your power into those high load or high energy demand areas is a really key part of accessing markets. I hope that addresses the question.
Great. Well, you all have been very good sports. Thank you so much for your answers and for your great presentations. I think we have a little bit of a break here with an offshore wind track a little bit later. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and we'll see you in a little bit.